couple days later, the Guardians of the Globe ended up finding their own way back home, forcing the Flaxlands to make a brand new portal for them in order to head back home. They surprisingly figured out that even though this dimension had accelerated aging, that didn't really affect them, and when they told them that while it was days for them, it felt like years for the Guardians of the Globe. So they were all just really happy to be back finally. Which it seems they were going to have a test for something that could be added to the GDA's arsenal pretty soon. After all, there was a Kaiju on the loose. A beast that was standing on all fours, having tentacle-like appendages that hide its mouth. And Invincible told them that the Guardians deserve some rest. After all, they have been fighting for what's basically been years now in their perspective. He'll handle this. Though before he left, he did tell Immortal that his new superhero name was going to be... He flew off to the scene. They were currently battling at the shore of an island. Most of the people had already been evacuated by this point, as Donald and several GDA soldiers were already here, as well as some of the heroes here to try and at least hold it off. Said heroes being Robot, Frobolt, as well as Kid 4. But despite all of it, all they could really do was hold it off and distract it for now. They were barely doing any damage to the Kaiju. Until suddenly at full speed, a punch lands on the Kaiju, sending it rocketing backwards. The Kaiju released a loud roar, staring towards what could have landed the blow, as in front of it stood Invincible, flying in the air, with Invincible telling the other heroes that he was going to have it from here. And the other heroes not in agreement, though Frobolt did tell him that this beast did have a little bit of a weakness to electricity, so if they had any way to take advantage of that, they should. Robot in particular was rather interested. After all, he had heard several things about Earth's greatest hero and seen him fight a couple times, but he was still trying to get information on them, leading to Mark using the scanners in his helmet in order to scan how powerful this beast was. And he was actually kind of surprised. Now sure, it wasn't going to be as strong as him or anything like that, but it would definitely be able to give him a challenge. And if they were to add enhancements to this thing, it could definitely become something that could rival Viltrumites. As Mark Grayson raised both of his fists, and thought to himself, time to tame a beast. As Mark and the Hail Mary rushed right towards each other, the Hail Mary attempted to slam one of its tentacles right into Mark, but Mark midair spun around it and avoided it, before flying over to its side and landing a hard punch on its side, causing the Hail Mary to let out a roar of pain. It then launched one of its feet out, trying to slam it down on Mark and slam him into the ground. And Mark contemplated for a moment if he should dodge it, but he decided to let it hit, leading to a crater being formed where Mark landed. However, Mark quickly lifted up the beast's foot, before pushing it by its feet upwards, launching it high into the air. And Mark had something that he wanted to test for a little bit now. He did now have a range option that he had recently been working a lot on, but in order to perform it, it would cause quite a lot of damage to the area around him. It was why he didn't often use it in combat, as he lifted up both of his hands and clapped them together, launching out a massive wave of wind. And that ended up launching the Hail Mary even higher up into the air before it landed on the ground, making an even larger crater in the process. And Mark stood in the air with his arms crossed as he was waiting for it to get up, as the Hail Mary launched out several of its tentacles to try and wrap around Mark's arms and legs. Using it to slam Mark into the ground, it was now even more angry, before Mark forced the tentacles off of him. However, before they could retract back to the beast, he grabbed two of them, yanking the beast right towards him, before he spun around midair and landed a hard punch right on its face. And before it could be sent flying backwards, Mark grabbed onto the tentacles again and used it to slam the beast right into the ground. As Mark couldn't help but wonder if it would be possible to tame this thing like a dog. He did always want a pet, and if this thing could end up serving as that role, it would definitely be a fun thing to spar with and just have as a pet. But that would take a lot more training and probably a lot more time. Either way, he was a little bit more determined now to put the time into doing that. Those thoughts were suddenly interrupted as a foot slammed into his face hard. Or well, not just his face, but his entire body. To Mark Grayson's surprise, the Hail Mary was still standing, as he was then flying into the water for a second before he flew out. As Mark dusted himself off while he looked towards the beast. And he said, "You definitely will make a good sparring partner once I'm done, but I can no longer allow you to cause potential damage. I'm ending this battle right here and now." As Mark clapped his hands, launching out another shockwave right towards the Hail Mary, before he rushed right towards it. After the shockwave landed, it didn't take long for him to close the distance, and he began to rapid-fire punches right on the Hail Mary. He was relentless, not letting the Hail Mary have a second to breathe. This was a fun fight for him, and definitely one that was allowing him to test his strength, but more importantly it gave him a sparring partner in the Hail Mary. He just needed to figure out a way to tame it. And with that barrage, he was able to knock out the beast, as he contacted GDA to tell them it was done. Cecil told him that several helicopters would arrive later in order to pick the beast up, but Mark told him that he could probably carry it back pretty easy on his own, especially considering that would definitely save them a lot of time. So after he dropped off the Hail Mary to one of the GDA's lab sites in order for it to be experimented on and put on ice for now, he decided to return back to his home. During this time, the Immortal was also sent out alongside the NASA agents towards Mars, in order to make sure it would go smoothly. leading to it playing out pretty similar to how it did in canon. I don't see the Immortal just letting some humans die, if I'm being completely honest with you guys. In this timeline, at least for now, a lot of the machine head stuff is going to generally just be avoided. Invincible is not as open out on the streets as he was before. He never had an encounter with Titan, so I don't see Titan trying to reach out to him. And with no Guardians of the Globe, that means Robot does not meet Monster Girl, so he's not going to try and steal Rexplode's DNA to try and make a clone of himself either, meaning the Mauler twins are still going to be in prison. Up to this point, Cecil had tried several attempts at trying to recruit them properly, but each of them always had led to them being rejected by the Maulers. The Maulers just didn't want to work for a government like Cecil, and they're starting to run low on ways to get them on their side, and it was really starting to seem like their only option was going to be Invincible himself. Though they now had a new weapon in the Hail Mary, not to mention the other scientists are starting to make some progress and try to make themselves stronger and make weapons to counter Viltrumites. New weapons to properly upgrade Invincible's suit, new ways to maybe upgrade other heroes as well. However, now Cecil had a different approach in mind for how he was going to approach the Mauler twin issue. They have been able to figure out quite a bit about the Mauler twins. One of the main things that they have been able to figure out is the Mauler twins absolutely hated authority, and now they knew what they were up against, he had an idea. As Cecil entered into the cell where the Mauler twins were, and then one of them told them that they already knew what they were here for and their answers still hadn't changed, and there was nothing that they could say that would change their mind. As Cecil decided that he was going to be straight up and honest with them for once. So, as you guys know, Invincible is the world's strongest hero, by far our strongest person that we have. What if I were to tell you there's an entire species of those types of people? All people who could be as strong, maybe even stronger than Invincible. Millions, maybe even billions of them that exist, that all have the same purpose and intention. To take over planets and make them part of their empire. If you think we're bad, imagine what that might end up happening to you once they find your technology, once they find you. That's what we need you for, what we've been preparing for. We need your help preparing to take on the Viltrumite Empire, and you're the only people who really can help us right now. After all, we only have one true defender against them, and while we can make that defender as strong as possible, having multiple would still be much better. And the message immediately became clear to the Mauler twins. They had two options right now. Either work with the GDA to help resist against an empire coming to their planet, or potentially be subjugated and have to deal with that empire. Now of course they could try and just sit back and do nothing, but at the same time that would just worsen their chances. However, Cecil could tell that there was something different this time. There was a shift in their mentality. They were thinking it through, as Cecil decided to teleport away, leaving them some time to think about things. He knew they weren't going to immediately say yes, but now the idea had been put in their head, they might actually think about it just a little bit. This one just felt more successful than all of the other attempts at this. All the while, Mark was beginning his normal school life. The first day of school for him had arrived, and getting adjusted to this was probably the hardest thing he had ever done. After all, he was trying to return to being a normal person after spending the last 11 years training to get as strong as possible in order to take out his father, in order to take out as many Viltrumites as possible. But now he was trying to at least balance that out with having a normal life. And in the process, he was actually starting to just realize how much of life he was really missing. As 7 months would pass, 7 months of a normal school life where Mark was starting to get more and more connected with the people there, mainly getting connected to even William. He isn't really trying to start anything romantic with Amber in this either, or even getting feelings for her. After all, he's so focused on being a superhero, and he kind of knows by this point that his best option is likely going to be getting in a relationship with another superhero. Considering how focused he was with training, and even though he did start a school life, he actually isn't behind on any of his schoolwork. After all, even though this is technically his first year in public school, he had been tutored by the world's best. That was what the GDA had done to make sure Mark could be as smart as possible. So he had been able to consistently keep up that training. And he'd also started to make some progress with trying to tame the Hail Mary. Now, it wasn't going to be that easy. Even after 7 months, it was still pretty angry at Mark, but it was starting to calm down and warm up to him a little bit. Though either way, the Hail Mary most certainly served as an excellent sparring partner for Mark. It wasn't very often there was anything on the planet that could really push him to improve, but the Hail Mary was the closest thing that he could get. But by this point, he was certain of something. Even without his armor, he was certain now that he was stronger than his father. Not to mention his armor had been upgraded several times over, adding in the flaxen guns and weaponry to his armor and enhancing them even further, thanks to the help of another scientist who was working with them on the project, one Scott Duvall. Somebody he had gotten to know pretty well over these past few months. After all, he was a brand new addition to the GDA, but he was surprisingly pretty smart. He also had an interesting power. At least interesting in Mark's mind, he had the power to convert kinetic energy into electricity. However, it was on the lower end and it didn't really have that high of an output. Maybe they could invent something later in order to make him stronger. Who knows, he might have a lot of potential. But that was for time to tell. As an interesting time ended up coming for the students to be able to explore the potential college they would be going to in the future. And Mark decided, why not, that could be a lot of fun for him to go through. Probably being able to see what college student life was like, it would be rather interesting for him. He told Cecil that he was going to be off for a little bit, unless they needed him for like some big colossal threat, he wasn't going to be there. And Cecil decided to agree. Mark had more than earned enough vacation time for himself. Which leads into the encounter with the Reanimen happening. However, he was able to basically foderize the Reanimen. I mean, this is a Mark Grayson who is stronger than Omni-Man by this point, so yeah. But it was still rather interesting to him that human enhancements could be going that far. Sure, one of them was no challenge for him, but if there were several of them, that would certainly make things more interesting. Mark was able to recognize this as one of the university students, so he decided he was just going to handle this right here and now. He didn't want something else to get in the way of his vacation. As he told them, "Do not worry, citizens. I am here and have things under control." Leading to Mark beginning his search, and when he was starting, he figured they were likely somewhere on campus. He didn't really have any place other than that to start. Fortunately, his helmet did help him in identifying who this person was and the fact that they were a student at this college. Eventually, this did lead into him finding D.A. Sinclair underground in the sewers. He took less time than Mark did in canon, but that was because Mark spent a lot of time just kinda goofing off and only did it at night in comparison to this Mark who just immediately got to business. And with only 3 Reanimen there, it didn't really stop him. Though Mark did remember how that one Reanimen chose to end their own life, and that they still had a little bit of human emotions into them. So maybe there was a chance that these 3 could end up being repaired and turned back to normal human society. However, what Mark was a lot more interested about was D.A. Sinclair. After all, he managed to reanimate a bunch of people and turn them much stronger, so maybe there was a chance he could do that for their own soldiers. Imagine that, GDA being filled with several super soldiers, that if enough of them came together they might even be able to take out a Viltrumite. Maybe this could also enhance him in the future, who knows. Just because they felt D.A. Sinclair would definitely get along well with their other scientists that they recently added to the team. That being the genius Mauler twins. It took quite a bit of time. They had only recently started to agree to work with them around about a month or 2 ago, but still, they had been working with each other, and now that they had D.A. Sinclair on their side, who knew what they could get done for the planet? Or well, D.A. Sinclair in custody. He knew that it would take some time for them to properly get D.A. Sinclair on their side, but if they could succeed in that, then who knew what the good they could get done was. And while things were going pretty peaceful on Earth so far, we now transition back to space. During the time Mark was in school, Alan the Alien eventually did return back to Coalition of Planets. And he reported to them about Earth, the fact that there was a hero there that was significantly stronger than even him. But more importantly, they were a half Viltrumite but not loyal to the Empire. If anything, they actually hated the Empire. They had dedicated the last 11 years to training themselves up to become strong enough to take on the Empire, so they found a potential ally in Earth. But more importantly was something else even more interesting. The original Viltrumite that was posted on that planet had abandoned their post. Both of these things were rather interesting to the Coalition of Planets. This also leads into Alan the Alien getting jumped by the 3 Viltrumites a bit earlier than in canon. After all, just as a reminder, this happens before Mark has even fought Omni-Man in canon. That was how important finding out about Mark Grayson actually was. And while the Viltrumites do want to track Omni-Man, finding him would be a lot harder. After all, Omni-Man had been on the run now for over 11 years. They had no idea where Nolan could be. For all they knew, they could be all across the universe, so they'd have to definitely send out some people to look for him. Though what was a little bit more troubling was the fact that Mark Grayson existed and was stronger than Alan the Alien. Something that they found out through their spy on the Coalition of Planets. And they weren't too sure who immediately they wanted to send. After all, this son now had the duty that Nolan did to carry out. But at the same time, they didn't really know how strong they were truly. But because they had no idea where Omni-Man was, General Krieg decided he would go personally to talk with Mark. Alongside him, he would also be bringing Anissa, for 2 separate purposes. They did know that Earth was a relatively strong planet. Of course, it wasn't going to be any issue for a Viltrumite, but with a Viltrumite there that might have had time to prepare, they needed to be cautious. But it was also to test the strength of the surviving Viltrumite, that being Mark. To test if Mark was going to be a worthy part of their empire or not. With General Craig choosing to send out Luke and Vidor as well as Fula out in order to try and find Omni-Man. They couldn't have a loose end like that around. And with that, they all took off in order to begin their next missions. As we now return back to Earth, and it was currently a pretty normal day. Mark was getting in some training in like usual, making even more progress of taming the Hail Mary. But now he had an additional thing added to his training program, which was sparring with the Reanimen. Now granted, sparring with the Reanimen wasn't for himself to train. It did help with his abilities, and it did also help with him being able to manage numbers better, but that wasn't the real purpose of this. No, the real purpose of this was to give the Reanimen more practice for fighting against Viltrumites, as well as more importantly giving D.A. Sinclair and the people in the lab more experience when it came to fighting those Viltrumites. It was also an interesting experiment for Mark because he had to control his power quite a bit in order to make sure he didn't cut through them. These Reanimen were also quite a bit more durable than even the normal ones, as D.A. Sinclair had figured out a way to replicate the Flaxen technology and add it to his Reanimen, using the notes from Mark's suit in order to add it to his own Reanimen soldiers. Now of course it wasn't as high quality as Mark since most of them were expected to die, but it did at least add additional reinforcement to their durability. But with Mark there, they were certain that each Reanimen was going to be better than the last. It did also make the Mauler twins get an idea as well. What if they were to make some of their clones that had died in the past into Reanimen? Though that was a little bit messed up even for them. Granted, it wasn't like they were going to produce new clones for them to turn into people that could be reanimated. It was just going to be using the old ones that already had existed, and there were a bunch of them that were already dead. The thought had come to their minds of using soup bodies in order to make Reanimen as well in the past, but at the same time, while they were desperate, they didn't think they were that desperate yet. There's also one more scientist who had joined in on their science team in order to figure out how to counter Viltrumites, this being the hero Robot. He wondered what his genius could help to apply to the others. And with the Mauler twins here, it did also give him an idea. After all, maybe this could potentially give him a new body. Though, right now we didn't have a need to get a new body yet, but maybe in the future, who knows. Currently, the four geniuses were all working on a brand new project together. While the project was certainly simple in nature, it was definitely going to be probably the most difficult project for them to pull off. But if they were able to do this, it would certainly give Earth an advantage. And that plan was making a clone of Mark. Mark was by far the strongest hero on this planet. So if they could get a second Mark on their side, it would be incredible. They already knew thanks to the Mauler twins they were able to clone the mind. But the bigger issue was actually figuring out a way to clone Viltrumite DNA. While they did have a near endless supply thanks to having a Viltrumite on their side being Mark Grayson, it was still rather hard to figure out, considering how resilient Viltrumite cells were. But if anyone on the planet was going to figure out a way to do it, it would be them. Now of course they weren't planning to make an entire army of Marks. That was excessive even for them, but they were planning to have at least a total of 3 Marks on the planet, counting the one that already existed. And once Mark had finished up this training session, somebody else decided to walk in. One of the heroes he was closest with, and someone who was actually pretty involved with his team, that being Adam Eve. Adam Eve was one of Mark's only few friends. Sure, of course Cecil cared for him, but it wasn't really a friend like this. And she also made a comment on the fact that the only thing she really ever saw Mark do outside of school was training. Almost teasing him about the fact that the only thing that he did in life was train. Though she chose not to, mainly because she also knew why this was the case, before she decided to give Mark an invite. For the two to hang out for a bit and just have some night where they can enjoy themselves and have a bit of a break from everything. And Mark thought it over for a couple of seconds before he decided to go. He already knew Cecil was trying to push for him to take more breaks more often. He wanted Mark to be as mentally healthy as possible, so he already could tell Cecil would want this for him. And this was also something that had worried Adam Eve quite a bit, which was just how serious Mark actually took the job. To the point where a part of her had to wonder if Mark just thought that this job was his life. And it was also part of why she wanted to do this. She wanted to know what the real Mark was going to be like, and just honestly give him the well-deserved break that he has earned. As the two of them took off, with Cecil smiling a slight bit, he was rather happy to see this for Mark. After everything that kid had gone through, he deserved that. If Cecil was being honest, sometimes he did wonder if taking in Mark was the right thing. He knew how close Red Rush's family was to Omniman's family, so maybe they would have been willing to take in Mark. And every single day he hated himself for the weapon that he had raised, the weapon that he had made. He had taken advantage of the rage that Mark was feeling towards the unjustified tragedy that had happened to him. But he also remembered something else. The fact that Omniman was still the strongest superhero to have existed until Mark came along. And if Mark was an uncontrolled variable like that, it would put the entire planet at threat. As he said to himself, we can either be the good guys, or the guys who save the world. And Cecil knew that each and every time he was always going to pick the guy who saved the world.